The room glowed with warm holiday lights, yet all I could feel was the cold sting of humiliation sinking into my chest as my supervisor's laughter rolled across the table. The silverware clattered, the air tightened, and for a split second, I swear the whole world tilted under my feet. If you've ever had a moment where someone's cruelty exposed something deeper, something dangerous, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this is where my life changed. I didn't know it then, but that small crack in my confidence was the first sign that everything around me was about to collapse. The truth was already moving toward me, quiet and merciless. Let me show you how it all began. I still remember the sting of that night. We were all gathered for the holiday dinner, the kind of event where everyone pretends to be warmer and kinder than they really are. But my supervisor never bothered with pretending. In front of the entire room, he brushed off my work as if it were nothing, laughing in a way that made my cheeks burn. I kept my smile steady, but inside, something cracked. It was a small humiliation, but it landed with a weight I couldn't shake, as if it were the first tremor of something larger moving under my feet. On the drive home, I replayed the moment over and over, wondering why it felt different this time. I'd endured difficult bosses before, but this felt targeted, sharpened, almost intentional. I didn't know then that this was the first thread in a much darker web being woven around me. And strangely, what lingered in my mind wasn't him at all. It was the face of a teenage girl who had been sitting near the restaurant's back door that evening, bundled in layers, quietly watching the world go by. I had seen her many times before, a reminder of how life can slip sideways without warning. I didn't know it yet, but she would become the reason I survived what came next. Most mornings in Columbus start the same way for me, quiet and unhurried, with the sky still holding on to the last hint of blue before the day fully wakes. By 7:15 a.m., I'm usually stepping out of my apartment, letting the cold air clear whatever emotions linger from the day before. My routine became a kind of anchor, walking 2 blocks to the same corner coffee shop, watching the city shake off its sleep. That was where I first started noticing her. A teenage girl sitting near the side wall, always wrapped in the same oversized jacket, her knees pulled close as if she were trying to make herself smaller. People passed her without a glance, their eyes fixed on their phones or the day ahead. But something about her presence tugged at me. There was a stillness to her, a way she watched the world with an intensity that didn't match her age. Over time, we developed a quiet rhythm. I would leave a warm bagel or a cup of cocoa near her feet, pretending it was an afterthought. She never reached for it until I walked away, but I always felt her gratitude in the soft lift of her shoulders, the way her expression softened for just a moment. I didn't realize then how much her steady gaze was taking in, how observant she truly was. I just knew that seeing her grounded me in a way I couldn't explain, and soon, that small connection would matter far more than I ever imagined. For years, Westbridge Financial Consulting felt like a place I was supposed to grow into, yet somehow it kept shrinking around me. Every morning I walked through those glass doors, hoping the weight in my chest would ease. And every evening I left feeling smaller than when the day began. The work itself was demanding, but it was the atmosphere that drained me. It felt as if the walls absorbed every bit of confidence I tried to build. Grant Miller set the tone. He carried himself like the entire office revolved around his approval, and he made sure I knew when I fell short of whatever silent standard he had created. His comments were never direct, but they cut all the same. Then there was Sabrina Cole, whose friendliness felt too polished, too measured, like she was always calculating what each interaction could earn her. Standing between them often felt like being pulled apart by two different versions of the same quiet hostility. Over time, I began to tolerate things I would have once pushed back against. I convinced myself it was normal, that I just needed to toughen up. Yet a part of me knew I was losing pieces of who I used to be. And strangely, it was Lena's steady eyes that lingered in my thoughts. The way she noticed things others ignored made me wonder what she would see in this place. That question stayed with me the day everything at work began to feel off. It started with the closed doors. Grant and Sabrina were never subtle, but they had never been secretive either. Suddenly, their office felt like a vault, shutting me out with a click that echoed down the hallway. Whenever I walked by, I caught the faint shift of voices dropping to a whisper, the kind of sound people make when they are discussing something they do not want overheard. The energy in the building changed, tightening around me in a way I could not quite explain. What unsettled me even more was their sudden interest in my personal life. Grant asked about my weekends with a strange softness that did not match the sharp edge he usually carried. Sabrina lingered at my desk, complimenting small things she would have never noticed before. None of it felt genuine. It felt like they were studying me, trying to understand something about me that I did not understand myself. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that stress was twisting things out of proportion. But then Lena's calm eyes returned to my memory. The way she would watch people, the way she once tilted her head at me as if she sensed something I had not recognized yet. That memory unsettled me more than anything happening inside those offices. By the end of the week, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. Something was beginning, and whatever it was moving closer. I was heading back from the break room when I heard it. Sabrina's voice, low and strained, drifting through the barely open door of Grant's office. I caught only a few words, but they froze me in place. She said something about making sure it looked accidental. The tone in her voice was what unsettled me most. It wasn't panic, it was precision, as if she and Grant were arranging something already in motion. I stood there for a moment, telling myself I had misunderstood, that they were talking about some client issue or a harmless scenario taken out of context, but the unease clung to me, tightening around my ribs. When Sabrina stepped out, her expression shifted too quickly from tense concentration to that polished friendliness she always wore around me. It felt rehearsed. Later that afternoon, I found myself thinking about Lena. Something about her steady observations made me feel less foolish for questioning what I saw. When I finally sat with her that evening, I let the moment spill out in fragments. She listened quietly, studying the patterns behind my words more than the words themselves. Then she shared her own impressions of Grant and Sabrina, picking up on desperation I had missed, the way people act when they are cornered by their own mistakes. Hearing her interpretation stirred something deeper in me. It felt like the first real alarm sounding inside my chest, the moment I could no longer pretend everything was normal. And it was only the beginning of what I was about to learn. I knew something was wrong the moment Lena walked toward me that evening. She moved with a stillness that didn't match her usual guarded calm, and when she stopped in front of me, I felt the air tighten. Her eyes held a seriousness that told me whatever she had uncovered was far worse than anything I had imagined. When she finally shared what she had found, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. She had overheard Grant and Sabrina again, but this time their whispers weren't vague. They were discussing a fire in my home. She had followed the tension in their voices and later found a folded sheet tucked behind a dumpster near the back of their building. On it was my address, the layout of my house, notes about the basement wiring, and even my usual schedule scribbled along the side. As she handed it to me, My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack open. I kept staring at the page, trying to convince myself this was some twisted misunderstanding, but the evidence was too precise, too intentional. Shock washed over me first, followed quickly by a cold fear that settled beneath my skin. I remember feeling strangely detached from my own body, as if my mind couldn't keep up with the reality forming around me. But beneath the fear, something else sparked, a raw instinct to survive. Whatever Grant and Sabrina were planning, it was no longer just workplace tension. It was a threat on my life, and I needed to understand why I had become their target. I spent that night sifting through every memory that had once felt insignificant, trying to make sense of how my life had become a target. At first, I told myself there had to be another explanation, that fear was twisting things out of proportion. But the more I retraced my steps, the clearer the picture became. Months earlier, when I received the inheritance from my aunt, I had mentioned it casually at work. I had even filled out updated financial forms in the office, never imagining anyone would study them with anything other than routine boredom. Now, every detail felt like a breadcrumb I had left out in the open. As I pulled old documents from my drawer, I saw how exposed I had been. My address, my insurance information, the sudden spike in my policy value after the inheritance. I remembered Grant's strange interest in my home renovations and Sabrina's habit of lingering near my desk, pretending to tidy something while her eyes flicked across my paperwork. None of it had seemed unusual then, but standing in my living room with Lena's warning echoing in my mind, the pattern snapped into focus. They weren't just planning to erase me, they were planning to profit from it. The inheritance, the insurance payout, the neat storyline of an electrical fire, it all fit too perfectly. A cold steadiness settled in me as the truth became undeniable. If I wanted to survive, I had to move before they did. I spent that night hidden in a small roadside motel outside Columbus, the kind of place no one pays attention to. I kept the lights low and paced the narrow room, waiting for the moment I dreaded and needed in equal measure. When the news alert finally lit up my phone, my breath stopped. The camera showed my house swallowed in flames, and the reporter spoke about me as if I had already drifted into memory. Hearing my own name listed among the dead felt like watching my life dissolve in real time. It was surreal, sickening, and strangely quiet inside me, as if shock had pressed every emotion flat. But the silence didn't last. When the broadcast shifted, everything inside me twisted. Fire crews had found a woman's body in the basement, unidentified, not me. Someone who had been placed there long before the fire started. The realization struck with a raw, physical force. This wasn't just arson. This wasn't just an attempt to profit from my death. Someone had been murdered to complete the illusion. In that moment, the fear I had been carrying reshaped itself into something sharper. Grant and Sabrina were not capable of orchestrating something this calculated on their own. There was planning here, resources, confidence born from practice. I felt myself stepping into a colder understanding. I had been marked by something far bigger than workplace envy, and if I wanted to survive, I had to uncover who was behind it. I knew that staying hidden would only prolong the danger, so I forced myself into a new mindset. Fear could still sit in the room with me, but it would not be the one making decisions anymore. I started by writing everything down: dates, locations, small details that suddenly felt important. I backed up every file I had, photographed documents I once ignored, and created a trail that no one could quietly erase. Once I had a plan, I began shadowing Grant and Sabrina from a distance. It stunned me how freely they moved through the world now that they believed I was gone. I watched Grant stride into the office with a confidence I had never seen, and I saw Sabrina carry folders that she kept pressed tightly against her chest, as if guarding the script of their next performance. Through windows and reflections, I caught glimpses of signatures being forged and forms being drafted that claimed tragic loss and unexpected inheritance. Every step I took felt like walking across thin ice. One wrong move, one familiar gesture, and they would know I was alive. Still, the more I observed, the stronger my resolve became. Lena helped from the edges, noticing patterns I missed, pointing me toward moments when their guards slipped. By the end of the week, my evidence felt solid enough to anchor the truth. I finally had the documentation, the photographs, and the timeline that proved everything. It was time to bring it all to the police and push this into the light. Walking into the police station felt unreal, as if I were drifting through a life I no longer entirely belonged to. I was still officially dead, and revealing myself made my hands shake in a way I couldn't hide. I laid out the evidence piece by piece, forcing myself to relive every step, every moment of fear, every realization that my own coworkers had intended to erase me. I watched the officers study the files, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern, and finally to a quiet, focused determination. When they agreed to act, a weight lifted from my chest so suddenly it almost hurt. I stayed hidden as they moved in on Grant and Sabrina later that day. Seeing them taken into custody should have brought relief, but all I felt was a strange, hollow ache. Their faces held no remorse, only shock that their plan had unraveled. Part of me expected the world to steady itself in that moment, yet something inside me whispered that this was far from over. That fear was confirmed when the detectives pulled me aside afterward. They told me the evidence connected far beyond two desperate coworkers. There were financial trails, anonymous accounts, and familiar names that had already slipped away before the arrests. Grant and Sabrina were never the architects. They were only pieces. As I left the station, the air felt heavier, not lighter. Justice had begun, but danger was still moving just outside my line of sight, waiting for the next moment to surface. When the detectives contacted me again, I could hear the shift in their tone even without hearing their exact words. Their update was simple, but carried a weight that pressed against my chest. The evidence I had provided had opened doors they never expected, and behind those doors stood someone far more calculating than Grant or Sabrina ever had the capacity to be. As I listened, I began piecing together the fragments myself: financial records, insurance anomalies, forged signatures that stretched across states. None of it was sloppy. None of it was impulsive. Grant and Sabrina had been guided, shaped, and pressured by someone who operated quietly within the shadows of financial fraud networks. The master operator, as the investigators called him, had built an entire life around exploiting people who never knew they were being watched. I realized then how easily I had slipped onto his radar. A modest inheritance, a vulnerable work environment, and coworkers with just enough desperation to be molded into accomplices. It all fit into a structure designed to look accidental from the outside. The dread settled slowly, not as panic, but as a sober understanding of the scale of what I had stumbled into. My survival had disrupted something larger than a single crime. It had interrupted an entire system built on silence and disappearance. Even so, knowing that truth carried its own kind of strength, I was still here, still breathing, still able to choose what came next. And I could feel the first fragile threads of healing beginning to pull me forward. The warehouse felt colder than the night around it, a hollow metal shell that swallowed every sound as I stepped inside. My hands trembled, but my focus held steady. I had replayed this moment in my mind so many times that fear had taken on a quieter, sharper shape. When the master operator emerged from the shadows, their calm presence hit me harder than any threat. Nothing about them looked extraordinary, and maybe that was what made everything worse. They carried themselves with the ease of someone who believed they would never be touched. As I listened to their justifications, the logic they believed excused every ruined life, I felt something inside me shift, standing there, staring into the eyes of the person who had turned my world upside down. I realized I no longer saw myself as a victim. I felt the weight of everything I had survived, everything I had uncovered, and it steadied me in a way I didn't expect. Their confidence cracked when they sensed I wasn't breaking the way they wanted. The distant thud of boots echoed a heartbeat before the doors burst open. Officers swept in with a force that cut through the tension like a blade. The master operator's expression faltered as they were taken to the ground, wrists bound, silence finally forced upon them. I stepped back, breath shaking out of me as if I had been holding it for days. For the first time since this nightmare began, the air felt open. My chest felt lighter, and I finally let myself believe that I was safe. When the warehouse doors finally closed behind me, the world felt strangely quiet, as if everything had been holding its breath right along with me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could stand still without anticipating the next threat. The weight of what I had survived settled over me in slow waves, each one reminding me how close I had come to disappearing from my own life. In that silence, grief and relief tangled together. I mourned the version of myself who had lived on autopilot, who tolerated mistreatment, who never imagined anyone could see her as valuable enough to target. Yet I also felt a deep, grounding gratitude. Gratitude for the people who helped me, for the instincts that finally woke up, and for the strength I didn't know I had until everything tried to break it. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It no longer controlled me. Instead, it reminded me of my capacity to endure and rebuild. I could feel myself shifting, becoming someone who paid attention to her own worth, someone who no longer apologized for taking up space. As I stepped back into the rhythm of my life, I knew the journey wasn't over. Healing would take time, and so would understanding what this ordeal truly meant for me. But for the first time, I was ready to face that future with open eyes. And that path leads directly into the final truth I need to share. There are moments in life that split everything into a before and an after, and this was mine. Looking back, I can see how many times my instincts tried to warn me, how often I silenced myself to keep the peace, and how much strength I had without even realizing it. What happened to me was terrifying, but it also stripped away every excuse I used to make for shrinking myself. I learned that boundaries are not walls, they are lifelines. I learned that trusting the wrong people is painful, but trusting myself is necessary. And I learned that resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about choosing to stand back up, even when the world thinks you're gone. If you're listening to this and carrying your own fear or doubt, I hope my story reminds you that your voice matters, your intuition matters, and your life is worth fighting for. None of us are as alone as we feel in our darkest moments. Have you ever faced something that forced you to see yourself differently? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.